Okay, good afternoon. It's actually evening from here, by my time, Nigerian time. My name is Oluwatosin Isaac Olaoluwa, and I'm on the journey of addiction recovery. Um, Given my experience with addiction actually started way back 1997 while I was transitioning into SS1. I before then I was a in the boarding school system of education, and all was going well. Given that I was in the boarding school, my mom was a single career woman, and so because of the nature of her job, I had to attend the boarding school. But owing to the fact that we weren't bonding much as a result of the distance and all given the my education system, she felt the need to um, have me begin school as a day schooler. So it was at that point when I got over to a day school for the first time in a very long time, given that all my years has have been much in the boarding school system. So it was new environment, new friends, and all of that. So in trying to interact with my new environment, and because of certain issues which I really didn't realize at the time, I began to experiment with substances such as alcohol, marijuana, and tobacco, which eventually degenerated into full blown addiction, alcoholism, and substance abuse, as the case may be. I like to share my story this way that I was more into alcohol, marijuana, and tobacco, and the occasional pills when I got into the university as a result of certain friends who came with it from their different places. But I never really got to see cocaine or heroin before then. And so I like to say that perhaps if I had seen any of those other substances, I would have also gone ahead to do them because I got involved with all that I came across with. So my descent into addiction, into a life of addiction, began in SS1. And at the time, I felt I could undo it because it was like a casual, fun thing. It was a social experimentation with my friends. We felt at the time, like we say here in Nigeria, we felt it was the fun thing. We felt smoking, drinking was what made me, us, big boys at the time. So I was doing also all that because I wanted to keep up with Joneses, as it is said. However, I never really knew what I was going into. And as such, the progression, which I often like to call degeneration, began. And I began to do more of drinking, more of smoking, because my tolerance level was also increasing. And that went on for all of my senior secondary school days, SS1, SS2, SS3. And at that time, I also got involved with another group of friends who were cultists at the time. And because that lifestyle of drinking and smoking also introduces one to a larger circle. So at that time, I got involved with elder ones who were in cults at their various school at the time. So it actually began for me, it exposed me to a new awareness, in the sense that I felt that becoming a cultist would make me more of a big boy. So I just simply blended with that ideology. So it was so easy for me getting admission into the tertiary school and I just went on to become a cultist. And so my woes became compounded. I was no longer just an alcoholic. I was no longer just an addict. I was also a cultist, and that also opened way for other vices as I began to also get involved with robbery, get involved with all sort of activities which I might not have been involved with had it not been for my involvement with drugs, and as it turned out. So my life just became a routine of the same, being that every day the things that I desire the most is to get high, because I could not envisage life without the bliss the bliss that the substances are called primarily marijuana and the occasional pills offered. Because life was boring, life was dull without these substances. So it was like every day I was living for the high. Every day I wanted more of what I had the previous day. So and to do that, it entails a lot of finances. And given that I am the only child of my mom, who at the time I just retired from a career, there was still a bit of finances available from a gratuity. So I now began to eat deep into our finances, and I began to put up a false lifestyle, um, deceiving myself primarily and as well as others, playing to the gallery and saying that I was a Yahoo boy, whereas I wasn't actually a Yahoo boy. I was just spending my mom's hard-earned money, feeding my habits. And all of this went on for quite a number of years. It was on like that from 1997 till 2007. And all those years I was um, gradually losing my mind, because the substances began to mess up my mind. I began to have a false sense of reality. I began to do so many things that I wouldn't otherwise have done. Like so many things really. I was involved, like I said, with robbery. I was involved with a number of rape incidences. I was involved with a lot of street violence. I was arrested on quite a number of occasions as a result of my involvement and inclusion in certain situations or groups that might not really be really worth my time. But because the fact that my mind was messed up, my mind was warped, and I wasn't really thinking straight. Imagine a young man at that age. The first thing he does early in the morning is to go seek the substance, go seek alcohol. I could be up as early as 5 o'clock, and I will be out on the streets with guys from the joints, from the slums. We'll be drinking, we'll be smoking, and I would be at it for the better part of the day till I eventually black out. And I might not even realize what had happened. Sometimes I would have memory loss. I can't really recollect the stuff that I did. I can't connect myself any longer. I altogether lost it. So much more that families began to get worried about my mental situation, and it was really, really a scary period of my life, and it was the same that way. So much more that at a certain time when I should be graduating from the tertiary institution, I had no option than to drop out, because as a result of my involvement with cultism, I began to stop classes, I began to miss classes, I began to miss tests, I began to skip examination period. So at the end of my 4 years duration in school, I had amassed quite a number of carryovers, and I was told to come back for 2 extra years. But at the time, my mind was so messed up, I felt it wasn't worth it, because there was also the danger of getting killed in court clashes as a result of my involvement with cultism. So I felt the safest thing to do at the time was to drop out, which I did. But lo and behold, um, from then to now, I've not really gotten any certification, as it were. But as a result of that, I've come to realize that um, being involved with drugs, being involved with alcohol, so much more that it tends towards alcoholism and other substance abuse as a way of messing up the mind. And quite a number of youths today are engaged in such activities, which um, made me also decide that the fact that I came out of my own mess as a result of the grace of God, I felt it was necessary that I also leverage on my experiences to reach out to as many people as possible so that perhaps they could learn one or two things from my own experience and avoid the horrors and the pains that I went through. So going back to my story, when I eventually dropped out from school, my mom at the time wanted to pressurize me to go back, but eventually my dad, who incidentally was absent for the better part of my life, we eventually got in touch with him, and he took a bold step then to say, okay, if I was convinced that I didn't want to go back to school, then nobody should force me to go back to school. And really, I really can't say how much that decision has really affected my life, in the sense that who knows, perhaps if I'd gone back, perhaps I might have been killed in court clashes, or who knows, perhaps I might have actually have gone on to change and still come out with my degree or my certification. But nevertheless, here I am today, and I am grateful for the grace that eventually gave me another opportunity at life. Because after that experience, 2005, I went on to continue drinking again for another 2 years till 2007, where eventually I came to a point in my life I realized that there was just two options available to me. It was either I ran mad as a result of my involvement with these drugs or these substances, or I just simply died. Because life at that time was really, really bad. It was bad. There was no more money. I'd mismanaged. I'd spent all my mom's gratuity under the guise of a false lifestyle of internet free fraud. I was living a false lifestyle. I was claiming to be a a Yahoo guy. Yahoo is a Nigerian slang for the internet free fraud. I was claiming to live a false lifestyle, that I was a Yahoo boy, whereas I was not. I was just simply spending my mom's hard-earned money. So as at 2007, as at 2007 year, there was no money anywhere else, and almost all families had um, gotten to the point that they no longer wanted to associate with me and my mom by extension, because every time I get to family their place, either I steal something or I do one crazy act or the other. So everybody was avoiding me and my mom by extension, because it was just the two of us at that time. So I, under that awareness, and given that awareness, I began to pray. Why? Because growing up with my mom, who was a Christian, a nominal Christian, she used to take me to church and all of that. So I was conscious of God, but I never really knew what it was really about. So coming to that rock, that place in my life, I just began to pray and I began to ask God to help me. So it was at that point help came, and help came in form of certain relatives who had began to just feel pity for my mom and were thinking what life would be like for her if I died. So they now began to advise her to seek some religious solution to my case. Incidentally, addiction rehabilitation is not widespread in Nigeria, and more so at that time, we were not aware of what I know now. So what was obtainable was majority of those who have challenges, they run to churches for deliverances and all of that, which I also did at the time. So in my case, I went to a particular church for a deliverance, and that was the beginning of my recovery. But as it so happened, it is one thing to leave the substances. It is another thing now to begin to deal with character flaws and issues of life as it concerns the individual. So for me, leaving these substances in 2007, I still had unresolved issues within me. I had no experience dealing with money in a wise manner. So I got a job, and because of the fact that I didn't know how to really handle money, I slipped back into the life of addiction and substance abuse, which incidentally was my first relapse. So, and that went on till 2008, where I felt I really needed help. So at that time, I was no longer waiting for friends or families to tell me what to do. I had a glimpse of what to do. So I just took the next opportunity to go to a Christian community, where I underwent a period of fasting for 12 days. That was now the real beginning, as I like to say, yeah, because at that time, 2008, I felt I just could not afford to go back to that lifestyle, the lifestyle of addiction, of substance abuse, of alcoholism, because at that time I was really, really tired of all that was obtained in such a lifestyle, because I had gotten to my limit. I'd gotten to the extent at which I could bear. So after the 12 days fasting, I still felt the need that I wasn't properly equipped enough to handle life out there. So I went on to another Christian community, where I stayed for about a month. And it was at that time I got like a revelation, which, in a manner of speaking, came from the scriptures. And it basically is summed up in this phrase that mm, my experiences should also count for the benefit of others. So I began to research addiction recovery using the US as a model, what is obtainable in the US as a model. But that was, as at then 2008, I was not really in tune with what was happening in Nigeria. So I now felt, okay, I needed to narrow this down to Nigeria, because I knew that I was not just the only one who was going through what I went through. Because even right then, I had friends who we had done so many crazy stuff together, and I knew that they were also feeling I don't want to say guilty, but let me say feeling bad about all what they were doing. But yet we couldn't really break the bonds of addiction, as it were. So I just began to say, what do I do? How do I do what needs to be done, so that my experiences would benefit others, so that youngsters coming behind me wouldn't also fall prey to what I experienced. So I now began to search what was obtainable in the Nigerian context as regards addiction recovery and rehabilitation. And I got onto the NDLA database. NDLA is our national body in charge of drugs and narcotics. So I got onto their database, and I began to research, and I got quite a number of organizations who were doing stuff. But incidentally, I felt it wasn't much publicized as I felt it should be, given that addiction is so widespread. I felt recovery also should be pushed much more into the limelight. So I felt, okay, one of the best way for me to start is to go and understudy what was happening in one of the rehab homes, which I did, and I eventually worked with them for quite a number of years, from 2013, starting 2013 till about 2016. But between 2008 to 2013, it was a funny period for me because every year, 2008 to 2013, I have some months clean time, and eventually I get to relapse. And so it was like I was in a pendulum like kind of state. I was here at a recovery level at a time, and I'll swing back to the relapse state at another time. And that was ongoing from 2008 to 2013 until I eventually felt that, okay, perhaps the issue was because I wasn't really active and taking my experiences as I felt 2008. So it was then 2013 that I now began to get more um, um, focused with my activities. Though between 2008 to 2013, I used to go to some secondary schools and share my experiences. But I wasn't really grounded in my conventions. So I was still operating from what will people say, from a mind of what will people say, how would they accept me? And I still felt some measure of guilt as to what I did. But coming come 2013, I began to have a feeling of freedom and of wholeness. Like I like to say, the issue of addiction for me is basically a search for wholeness. Everyone individual who is caught up with one form of addiction or the other is actually on a quest for wholeness, a search for wholeness. There's a void in there, and we're trying to fill the void with substances of of our choosing. So it's the recovery also is for me is actually also like a discovery of wholeness, understanding the fact that you are actually complete in regards of whatever the situation is, and it's just being more in tune with one's own true self. So now, as a result of all of these experiences, I've come to a place in my life where I feel, given what is obtainable in the society, so many of our youngsters doing drugs, doing substances and all of that. And some of us have gone through these experiences, and some of us has actually, by the grace of God, come out of it. I feel it is necessary for us to just get out there, share our experiences, and that's what I have been doing, and that's what I still intend to do as the days also unfolds, as the future also is unveiling. So basically, my experiences taught me quite a number of things, that the individual is a sum total of certain experiences that now either could lead him on into a part of addiction, or it could or lead him on to a part of fulfillment. Now, in my case, I never really had a father figure, as in that my father had left us, myself and my mom, while I was just a child. I didn't really realize it at the time. But now I feel, or let me say, I know it was also part of what was responsible for my experience, my experimentation with drugs, because I was seeking acceptance. I wasn't really complete in the sense that I felt lacking in the qualities that makes up a home. My mom wasn't really available as much as she was there physically, but she wasn't really available emotionally. My father wasn't there physically, wasn't there emotionally. So there was that void. And also I didn't really know who I was. There was no connection with my true being, with my true self. So all of these speaks of an identity crisis, which many out there are actually experiencing. So in order to fill that void, many actually now begin to use drugs, use substances to make up what is lacking in their life. And eventually, the truth is, the addiction is the using the substances is not actually the solution. It's just a part of the problem, because eventually the body now develops tolerance for that particular brand of that particular substance or that particular form of addiction to other substances as well. And so all of these are the realities of life as I've experienced it. And looking back now, I'm also grateful that I went through all of that in the sense that now it's made me a better person. Now I am more aware of certain realities of life. Presently, I'm married, I have a little child, and as much as possible, I try to be there for my child. I try to be there for my wife. I try to be as much a positive influence in my community as I can be. And all of this speaks of just being a better person, just being a better person and trying to make life count one day at a time. And that brought me to the fact that early on in my early days of recovery, I came across the statement one day at a time, and it was my maxim for quite a number of time for quite a time a whole lot of time, in that I just kept living one day at a time. So even those times when I relapsed, I said, okay, this phase two will also pass. And incidentally, here I am today. I've been clean. I've been sober for about 4 years now, and it's been a wonderful experience so far. It's been really, really intriguing, and I'm grateful for the relationship that I've built over time, the connections that I've had, my experiences. Sharing my experiences has helped me to become like a bridge to certain organizations, between certain organizations and their community, has helped me to become a sort of positive influence in certain communities. And even here where I presently live, I also champion oversee the work being done at an orphanage. And it also gives me a unique bonding experience with the kids, because some of them actually also came from the streets, and they've also had one or two experiences with one drug, one substance or the other. So all this has just turned out to be for good, as against the evil that it would have been. So now, basically, my life is about enhancing the well-being of others, even as I also daily strive to become a better person. So that's it.